This week, German Chancellor Angela Merkel is visiting West Africa. She'll start here in Ghana, go to neighboring Nigeria, and then Senegal. But why is this visit necessary? And what will she be doing on this visit? Let's go to Berlin for some clarification from our partners. The DW business correspondent Javier Arguedas is on this beat for us. Javier, why is Angela Merkel making this trip? And what is she looking to achieve in each of these countries?
Well, Gifty, the German government has actually said that this trip has two main purposes. The first one is to strengthen economic ties and especially private investment from German companies in the African countries. And the second one is to help reduce the influx of migrants coming from African countries to Germany and to the European Union. Now, as you can imagine, these two things go hand in hand. And behind that, there's a program and a theory about the German government, a strategy that it is following in order to help achieve these two goals. The program is called Compact with Africa, and it is a very ambitious investment project that works as follows. In theory, the countries participating, which are selected by the German government, Ghana, by the way, is one of them and the only one of the three countries the Chancellor is visiting that is currently participating in the program. These countries will introduce business-friendly reforms, and in exchange, the German government is going to push German companies to actually invest in these countries. That is a flagship project by the German government, which is, however, controversial because there is no certainty that this program is what the African countries need to spur economic investment and economic growth. However, at least in theory, if these talks succeed, Germany will also include other countries, like, for example, Nigeria in the Compact with Africa program, will spur investments and therefore generate jobs and wealth, which will, at least in theory, reduce the influx of migrants. That is what the Chancellor is after on this trip.
And that's a key message from the from Germany, migration. But speaking of talks on migration, what new will be said that has not already been?
Well, you're perfectly right. You have the impression that you've heard it all and many times, but there is a new development that might be interesting for some of the partners in African countries, and it is that Germany just recently changed one major point of its legislation on migration, which is the ease for qualified workers to come to Germany for work. We're not talking about people that are seeking to go to Europe to have a better life, but people who actually are qualified and have skills that German companies might need. Now, for those types of workers, Germany just eased regulations. Therefore, you do not need a company to sponsor a visa, but you can essentially come to Germany and look for a job here based on your qualifications, on your German language skills, and on your income. This, however, might be a big opportunity for companies in the African countries and also in Germany to help foster those private investments, to help foster the exchange of goods and services, since workers can now more easily come to Germany. We will see if that message is also part of the agenda and how the response will be in Africa itself.
It sounds really interesting to me. Well, on business prospects, by the way, Angela Merkel has been touting Africa as a, quote, future market for German businesses. But an influx of German products on the African market is not necessarily welcomed by everyone. Where do you see this part of her discussion on this trip going?
Well, the discussion is definitely part of what you also see here in Germany. There is big criticism to the strategy that not only Germany but other European countries have followed in Africa, and it is because some of the concepts that work here in Europe that are so essential to how Europe works does not really necessarily work in the African continent, because some leaders in Europe fail to recognize that Africa is perhaps the most diverse continent we have on this planet. So things like free trade, for example, that are so key to how the European economy works, does not necessarily is a concept that can be applied that way in the African nations. And let me give you an example. If we talk about eliminating trade barriers and tariffs, that sounds really good. It works here in Europe. It might work even in Latin America, for example. But if you see how the stations or the countries in the European Union subsidize their products, especially their agricultural products, what the elimination of trade barriers causes is that products from Europe will get to the African countries and will be cheaper cheaper to buy in Africa than many of the products that are being produced in Africa. And that is probably not the right solution, because the African countries need to produce their own products to help consumers in the countries buy them there and then even export them to the European Union. So eliminating trade barriers and suggesting, like one of the persons of this trip has suggested, a free trade zone or a further free trade agreement, despite the fact that there are already many agreements in place, might not be the right solution, and that is causing a lot of criticism inside Germany as well.
Well, there has been a debate on that matter here in Ghana some time past, but let's stay briefly on business and wrap it up, because Africa is already swarmed by Chinese businesses in spite of the economic partnership agreement that was signed between ECOWAS states and the EU. Do German businesses really still envisage that there is space for them?
Well, you know, the African continent is always and very often mentioned as a land of opportunity for economic growth and for many businesses prospering. However, it is true that the Chinese businesses have very bold projects and very bold moves that are also backed by the state. Maybe that is the main difference. The Chinese government is behind these massive projects that we're seeing in Africa, where businesses are having bold moves. And many say that that is exactly what Germany would need to do for its companies to also participate in these opportunities. We will see if the German government leaves it to the companies itself, or if it actually intervenes in order to have bold projects that are state-backed, which is the big difference.
Right. I'm just wondering how the response has been. What has the reaction been to the trip that Angela Merkel is taking?
Well, we have seen voices in one direction and the other. Of course, every time you mention that the Chancellor is going to have a focus on helping the African countries, there is a lot of interest here, because we know that the reason, or one of the reasons why there is an influx of migrants that Europe is struggling to deal with, is the fact that the countries in Africa need further development aid. But how you achieve it is always a matter of debate. And there is a lot of criticism by Angela Merkel, essentially saying that Germany is not going to have classical aid programs for the African countries, but is going to leave it to private companies to invest. The problem is that in order for companies to invest, you need the conditions being met in the countries themselves, and that is where cooperation is more needed than ever. So we could sum it up in one phrase: it is easier said than done.
Easier said than done, indeed. And you can trust politicians with some of these things. Javier, thank you very much. Javier Arguedas is a business correspondent with our partners DW, joining us all the way from Berlin. So by now we should expect that already the Chancellor is here in Ghana. We'll be keeping our eyes on that. Our presidential affairs correspondent will also be following that. Javier, thank you so much. Have a good day. You're still watching The Pulse with me, Gifty, and up here.